Well, now, welcome to the South. I'm talking about the deep South. Things are changing in the South, but as in a lot of things, they're changing very slowly, but presently at a rapid rate. The reason I'm wearing this hat, the Stetson, is because this Stetson was popular in the 20s, 30s, 40s, started to fade in the 50s, just like prejudice is fading in the 2000s. I was born in 1947, right after the Great War, and I've seen a lot of history. Today, it's been 66 years of history. In talking about the Deep South, you have to understand where people were coming from. They were coming from England, Germany, later on from Ireland, and many countries that were in economic turmoil. My people came to this country from England. They were part of the Virginia settlers. England gave a bounty. If you would move to America, it'd give you 180 acres per person of Virginia land. So the ships from England came in. When my people first came to Virginia, Virginia was, and is not today, a great farming state. And they learned that you could move down to South Carolina, North Carolina, sell your land in Virginia, and you could buy more land in the Carolinas, and maybe you could afford a hand, a slave. So they moved to the Carolinas, and then very slowly they moved. They found that the United States was giving land grants over in the Deep South. So they slowly moved. They took their wagons. My family was part of the Ford family and the Rawls family. And the Rawlses were in the wagon behind the Fords, and they moved as a group. First, they went over to Huntsville. They could not traverse the rivers. There were no bridges in 1700s. This was like they finally arrived in Mississippi in 1796. Well, this is 20 some odd years after the American independence. So it was early America. So as they to come across, they had to go up through a gap up into the mountain ridges of Tennessee, and they came along the ridges of the Appalachian and then went back down around the river into Huntsville, Alabama. Now, they stayed there for 10 years, and the pressure of the Indians was a problem, and they were not happy. And they had an opportunity to get a significant land grant on 31st parallel in Mississippi. The 31st, below the 31st parallel was Spanish territories. Um, and that line stands today as the southern boundary of that particular part of Mississippi, which separates Louisiana with that 31st parallel and the Pearl River. Now they came down, they went up the Tennessee River. They put their wagons on flatboats. They floated up the Tennessee River and down the Mississippi River to Natchez. And then they came across a military road into the what today is Marion County. They were settled there on the river. They were forwards, so they were forders. They helped people cross the river. And my great granddaddy Joseph Ford lived on the east side of the Pearl River, and his brother John Ford lived on the west side, and he was a lay minister, Methodist lay minister. And his house stands today. It's one of the oldest houses in Mississippi. So they progressed with their farming, and of course the Pearl River, like the Mississippi River, had fertile land. And the Mississippi River only, the delta of the Mississippi River, the developed delta, only went as far as Vicksburg before the Civil War. All of the delta that major farming in Mississippi, the delta, Greenville, Cleveland, it was actually cleared by day laborers after the Civil War. It was a rainforest. Um, so when you cleared land and plowed the fields with mules, you couldn't get a lot done. So if you had extra help, if you could afford to buy labor as slave labor, it was expensive, and support these people uh, from one year to the next. Uh, you could farm more area. So I actually have the wills of Ebenezer Ford uh, gifting the different slaves to the different children. Now, my brother asked, well, I made a comment, well, they had a significant plantation cotton growing operation, and they were landed people. They had a land grant signed by Madison. All the land grants before the second term of Andrew Jackson were actually signed by the president, whatever president was at that time. So my brother asked, well, if they had all that money, where'd the money go? Well, after the Civil War, uh, the uh, the slaves, of course, were free, and there was no economic system to farm that land. So if you couldn't farm the land was worthless. It had no income, no revenue. So, um, luckily for my family, um, my great great grandmother was from Vermont, and during the Civil War, she took her two 13 and 14-year-old sons back to Vermont to Middlebury College, which is now a fine school today. And they were educated during the Civil War and were able to come back and uh, have significant lives. One in T.S. Ford as a attorney, the other one, uh, Bob Ford, was a doctor. So that's education. You can't take education away from someone, and that's the way my family's lineage has survived through being educated. So that comes up to the major point of some of the hardest years for the people that were brought here from Africa uh, was after the Civil War because there was no economic system to support them. And eventually, if you read much of Jimmy Carter's writings, you'll find out that they eventually ended up as day laborers. They were paid by the day, and people had trouble paying, having the capital and to pay them. And so they lived in the same slave quarters, and they ate much of the same diet and had many of the same hardships that they did as slaves when they were impoverished in the agricultural economy. Now, when we talk about prejudice, and I think that's one of the concerns of this particular interview, is a lot of the prejudice of those times was actually economic prejudice, where you had the big farms with eastern capital. They were able to operate huge farms, and they had hundreds of slaves, uh, people that they had real farming agricultural businesses, and they produced a lot of cotton. Now, cotton today has finally gotten to the same price it was before the Civil War. Before cotton, people wore flax and wool, and cotton was it was the new iPhone of that time, and everyone wanted cotton. And so the South was gifted in the right climate and temperatures to produce cotton, and cotton was king. The South was generated a lot of money, but these Virginia settlers, many who were constantly flooding this area in Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, North Carolina, these were the the new people, and they could usually acquire 40 acres. They had 40 acres and a mule. That's an old saying. Man had 40 acres and a mule, and he also had several children to help him farm that 40 acres. You know, a lot of farming in the United States was done by child labor, people's own children, and it worked. It worked in survival, and it was better than being a hunter-gatherer family, I assure you. So the people with 40 acres and a mule, they would sell their cash crop was cotton. Well, at the end of the year, they would owe the factorers, the people that were, it's another form of banking, where they would front the seeds and implements and things to get the people over from one year to the next. And then they would come in and sell their cotton, and they would get the difference. Well, the big farms over they produced huge amounts of cotton, and they kept the market price uh, down. So here was a man that was starving to death, and he was competing to survive his family, competing against hundreds of these big of people working for these big farms, and these people were the blacks from Africa, the slaves. So, of course, there was when your family was starving and you were losing your farm and you went through all those hardships, human nature is you want to blame somebody, and they blamed the blacks, and that was a lot of the root of this prejudice. I mean, most of these people had never seen a black person before they'd come to the South, so this was a new prejudice, and it was, of course, it was an easy prejudice in that the color of their skins was made them very obvious that they were the target of people's um, envy or hate or whatever the makeup of prejudice is. So I think that that was a big factor, and then also prejudice. was from colloquialism, where people lived in one area. Their family was there, everyone they knew were there, and the people that came in that were different, they were not that welcome, whatever race they were, because they had human beings can be very clannish. So you had colloquialism, which was a basis of prejudice, and so you had economic prejudice, color prejudice, and colloquial prejudice. I'll never forget being in Vermont with a buddy of mine, and we went into a bar after skiing, and the girls asked my friend if he was local, and he said, yeah, he was local. And they said, no, you're not. You're a damn Russian. Uh, Russian immigrants tend to migrate into Vermont, and the people from Vermont look at them as foreigners, immigrants. They're prejudiced against them. So that's just one example of economic prejudice, colloquial prejudice. So you got those three things, and so where are we today? Well, World War II was really it made young people find out that there were more places to live than they're going back to their little communities. So many of these places like Meridian, Mississippi, who had a larger population before World War II than they do today, their young people did not come back. They stayed in California, Baltimore, there are other places. So there was a disbursement and a migration. So the worst aftermath, I mean, Mississippi is an agricultural state, was an agricultural state. Now today, our biggest industry is gambling, forestry, agriculture is still a big industry, manufacturing, well diversified state. There's no excuse for uh, people in Mississippi not doing well. But I wouldn't call it an excuse, but the reason that the black community has suffered in their coming out of evolving out of agriculture into the modern world is that Mississippi, the people, the leaders of Mississippi are the people with interest. They're just human. They wanted to keep inexpensive farm labor to compete in world markets, and so they didn't really have. It wasn't in their interest for the people that worked on these farms to become educated because that would compete that would allow them to compete in the modern world. So segregation was not just about black people being a different color. It was about keeping labor, controlling the cost of labor, just like the strife of the labor unions. So this that they basically kept these communities with black people educating black people, and they didn't have the university. They didn't have the uh, income of the new education that the rest of the citizens of this country enjoyed. And now it's a big deficit. It's a big expense today. People complain about, well, I don't want to support people that aren't working. Well, the Mississippi Delta, there's a book called High Cotton, and it's a history of cotton and our agriculture in Mississippi. And it's all about one man with two part-timers farming 4,000 acres. One of these crop dusters can put herbicide out 2,000 acres a day. It's $1 million crop duster. And then they can put fertilizer out 2,000 acres in a day. So they don't need the tractor drivers. They don't need people hoeing weeds, and of course the cotton pickers. Uh, they massive machines that can do everything a cotton gin can do while it's in the field. So we don't need agriculture in Mississippi doesn't need these hands, but there any of them in the 20s, the trains would pull up and they would migrate up into the north where there was manufacturing and industry that could give them employment. So many of them have left, but we have a residual. Mississippi doesn't have a lot of people. Um, it's just like I think 3 million people. So, but but the black community is significant in Mississippi. That residual agricultural community, a lot of it has moved out, but I think it's like maybe 30%, 33%. And many of them are prospering in Mississippi. They're 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 the valedict. A lot of them they've got their fair share percentage of valedictorians and outstanding students and kids going to Ivy League schools, and kids doing well, and bankers and teachers. They're doing well. But there is one sector of the school industry, uh, which is doesn't come up real high in competition in the United States. Sometimes it's certain categories it's last. But if you took out 11 districts, school districts, Mississippi would be in the top percentiles, number 30 in some categories and top 10 in others. We have a tremendous school industry. The artists and intellectuals that have come out of Mississippi, John Henson with the Muffets, the musicians, the outstanding political people, great minds. It's another state that is a great uh, petri dish for great people. And so this agricultural thing and the segregation was a big error in not letting these people prosper with the progress of time. So now, uh, if they're in the integrated system, universities, college systems, school systems of Mississippi, they're doing as well as anyone. But now there are 11 school districts, which happen to be, a lot of them are in that Delta area, or where the agricultural community migrated into cities and have never found uh, employment at their educational level. So it's like a cycle, and we have to beat that cycle. Now, one way to beat that cycle is like during Katrina, forced migration. A lot of those people hadn't had useful lives for generations. So they were forced to move from like a city of 1.2 million or whatever the population you always is into a city like Houston with 9 million people. And there's going to be a lot more demand. There's a lot more chances for them to prosper and do well and to integrate into the economic system. There's all kinds of colors in Houston, Mississippi. It's an international city. Hispanic, black people from all over the world, India, Europe, great German community. So the immigration people, if they don't have good lives in the Mississippi Delta, which you know Delta's doing good, but it can't handle employing this uh, obtrusive, uh, awkward population. It's awkward and obtrusive in that it's it's kind of it's people that have sat there and hadn't progressed. They hadn't evolved out of that situation. So they could migrate out with help. They need to migrate out. But it's easy to live there, it's cheap to live there, so there's no forced reason, no big push to migrate. Another solution is the ex-premier of Israel said something that I think is a great solution for the world. And he said that one of the big problems, and of course poverty throughout this 7 billion population that we have on this earth, I mean, we're doing well compared to many of these populations. He made a comment. He said that women are the solution to the evolution of bringing mankind onto a fair playing field. And that in societies where you don't educate women and you don't prosper women, and his point was that women tutor and teach the children. They tutor and teach the men. And so that's exactly what's happened in the Mississippi areas that have not prospered, is where the men have no employment, they have no usefulness, so they migrate out or they don't participate. So the women raise the children and they do the best they can, but and they're doing better because they are becoming more and more educated. Teenage pregnancy in the black community has made great progress, and these women are learning that that's not a good idea. And so it's not that there's not progress being made, but we could do better. And when I say we, uh, the the population Mississippi made was a great revenue and taxpayer throughout history, especially when cotton was king. It paid for the defense of this country, and now it needs some help. And not that it's not making great contributions today to this country, but it needs extra help to bring these people. I mean, these people need special attention, and and they are getting special attention. There's lots of federal programs, and but investing in people. I tell a story about a man that worked for me, white man. He had 7 children. They had 2 beds in the house. They he would work if I had 80 hours of work to do, he would work 80 hours. It wasn't that he didn't work, but he was subsidized by food stamps and government programs. And today, 3 of his sons work offshore. They make big money. One of his sons manages a super grocery store, makes hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, pays huge amounts in taxes. His daughters are married to prosperous men. They're paying back in taxes every year more than the government subsidized them their whole lifetime, their family the whole lifetime. So we invested in that family, and now we're getting a return. And most of the young black men I know have got great jobs. They work offshore. They work in the oil and gas industry. They work. They're teachers. They're got fine homes. What's the deal? So we're making great progress in the Deep South, in Mississippi and Alabama, Georgia. There are more young black professionals in Atlanta than any other city in the United States. I think the problem is quickly solving itself. And people are solving their own problems if they're given the tools. And so that's what it's all about. That's what it's all about in the Deep South. And don't tell anyone, but the Deep South has got some of the best weather. The humidity is wonderful for the ladies. Uh, got and what I enjoy about the Deep South, the reason I want you to keep it a secret, is because I like scarcity. I like to go fishing and fish all day without seeing a lot of folks. And I love beautiful forest and fields and country roads. So, but the Deep South is fine, and these people are making great progress. And a lot of this hate business, which has always been there. The largest population of the Ku Klux Klan was in Indiana, and not that people in Indiana hate or had a reason to hate. It was all about the money. They had some people that the Klan paid $30 for every membership. These people would get 20, and the Klan would get 10. So they sold a lot of memberships in Indiana. But the business of hate is one of the least profitable, most destructive things to the people that do the hating. And as soon as we educate all people of that fact, I think we'll have a lot better world. Come to Mississippi.